once again, thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance, as always. I'm Mike Scala, joined by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. Of course, we have a lot to discuss. We're going to talk about the bill in the New York State legislature aimed at Chick-fil-A. There's breaking news out of Colorado. There is a reparations commission that was just signed into law in New York. So we got things to get into. But first, what's going on, Jay?
Not not much, but I was mulling over a post that you posted a couple days ago
Oh, it
where
is. Oh,
you,
okay. I was gonna maybe. Well, I know you're in Japan, so the time difference. We're on a whole different day. But I was gonna mention the one from earlier today about people checking their phones. Is that the one you were on?
that's what I'm
Okay,
talking about.
good.
Okay, maybe it wasn't a couple days ago, but yeah, to me it just I
It's
felt like I
yesterday.
saw it 2 days ago.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Where you posted that I guess it was a study that showed that people check their phones 144 times a day.
right. That's well, Americans. I mean, I don't know what other countries. I'm assuming it's
Americans.
probably similar around the world, right? But that sounds like a lot. And then when you break it down, I did the math on that. It's about once every 6 minutes, assuming that someone is sleeping for 8 hours. But it's about where it falls.
Right.
It's still a lot. I mean, obviously, we can see how that would happen because everyone's just always checking their phones now every few minutes.
Right.
But when you add it all up, 144, that does seem like we have a bit of a problem, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. It's a big problem, and it was another one of the reasons it caught my eye is I just kind of had a similar conversation with someone a couple days before that, and she was talking about recently how she was having a lot of blurry vision and eye strain and this and that, and I was like, you're on your. Do you realize how much time you use your phone? Like
Yeah.
even if we're watching a movie or TV, like you're using your phone at the same time to play video games sometimes while doing that. I'm like, and so we went in, I don't know on the Android, but on iPhone, you can go in and you can check your how many hours a day that you use that phone. Each day it keeps a record, a log, and what you're using. And so I was like, pull up your thing. Go pull it up. Let's go do it. And we pulled it up and she had used her phone for over 6 hours that day alone.
How far is it a
And
day?
that, huh?
Was that at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day?
It was towards the end of the day, probably in the evening. And I was like, and this was
Well,
her
it's like
average
your
was
waking
six.
hours, right? You have to figure that. It's not like 6 out of 24 because you are sleeping,
Right,
presumably. Yeah.
right. And like, you think about that, that's
Yeah.
a lot of time. And I'm like, you're focusing on this very small area, doing eye intensive activity for 6 hours.
Right. Right.
Like,
See, I was
you-
wondering if there was an app, and if not, maybe we can come up with one that will track how many times you access your phone, not just the
yeah,
I'm on the phone, right? But how many times you're opening it and closing it throughout the day. And then maybe you do an average over the course of the week or the month or whatever, right? Just to keep track of that. Because I do think that we're on our phones too much. And I
right.
put in that post that I try to check it about 3 to 5 times a day. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on the circumstance, but we may be moving towards a society that's less reliant on the phones. I saw a meme
Think
not
so?
long ago. Well, at least in terms of using it as a phone, right? I think maybe people are using it more as like just a computer now. But
Yeah.
I saw a meme not long ago, and actually a few people were posting it about um, they call it a little rectangle, right? Their phone, a little rectangle in their pocket. But they were saying that they used to have ringtones. Everyone used to get a ringtone, and people
Right.
pay for the ringtone, right? And now they said they would smash that little rectangle if it made a sound. And so I don't think people are using it as a phone. I think people are starting to realize that it's not so healthy to be on the phone all the time. And
Right.
people may use it as a computer, but is it really any different from using a tablet or a laptop? It's just a device at this point.
Right. Yeah, it's just because it's so small and it's in your pocket and it's so convenient. And there's, you've got so many useful things on there. It's just people are using it to excess,
Mhm.
right? It's way too much. Like I said, 144 times or over 6 hours of a day looking at that screen. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I just wonder if that's just kind of the world we're in. Not even so much about phones, but just the technology. I mean,
Oh
people
yeah.
computers, or if they're working from home, whatever it is, we're just always on a screen, whatever kind of screen it happens to be. A
No,
small,
absolutely.
big one, and so that's part of it as well. But I feel like we're starting to at least be cognizant of the fact that it's not healthy to be on the phone all the time. And you can probably expand that and say you're just using technology all the time, right? People should maybe get out more.
Right.
I don't know, but it seems like we're starting to learn that because it wasn't really a thing years ago. Like this meme is really onto something. People would pay for ringtones. People would be calling each other, and you would have a different ringtone for everyone in your life or whatever. Now everyone kind of keeps their thing on silent. I think people aren't even trying to look at it that much. But then again, they look at it
Yeah.
144 times. I don't know how that works. If they're looking at it 144 times, how come it's always on silent? We don't want to hear from it anymore. I guess because people are just looking at themselves, so they don't need to be notified. That's kind of sad. They don't
Well,
even
I
need
think
notification.
some of it is social engineering, right?
Yeah.
Social media for one, where you get that dopamine hit every time someone likes a comment or likes a post that you've done or replies. So you got that addiction to getting that engagement, that feedback. And so people are checking for messages. Oh, I posted something. Did someone reply yet? Or did someone like the comment to think it was really cool? So there's that type of stuff. Then people, of course, checking email to see if they're getting some kind of some kind of message. If they're playing some sort of a game that is social engineered to give you little small bits of accomplishment, which keeps you addicted. Like these things are social engineered into the game style to play. And so it's just more and more things to keep people looking at your device and engaged in the app. And each app is trying to keep you in their app as much as possible. And then you've got like 100 of those on your phone. So
See,
yeah, it's
yeah, I have not taken social media off my phone entirely. I did at one point as a break, right? But now I have it on my phone, but I took it off of the home screen, so I'm not seeing it as much. And I'm not checking. I think I put in the comments there. I'm not checking the group chats anymore. Those are all on mute. I'm really taking steps to mitigate my usage because I think that it does distract from the work I'm trying to get done. And everyone's career is going to be different, everyone's job is going to be different, so it may require different levels of usage and different types of usage. But for me,
right.
I'm trying to focus. If I'm working on a legal thing, like a motion, a paper, an argument, whatever I'm working on, I don't want the distractions of checking my phone 144 times. To me, that takes away from what I'm trying to concentrate on, what I'm trying to work on. And when it comes to email, I've got that on my laptop. And even then, if I'm working on a legal argument, I'm not going back and forth to my email constantly. Now, every once in a while, you might take a break, and that's healthy to do that. But you don't want something to come up. That's the thing. Let's say you see something in your email that's going to distract you from what you're trying to get finished, right? Something about a different case or something else, right? And now that's occupying your time, your mind at least. And so even if you're trying to work on that original thing, well, now the email you just read is in the back of your head. And so I try to keep that separation. Someone said that it sounds like I'm almost off the grid, and that's kind of a sad state of affairs when you can say to not check your phone 144 times, to check it 3 to 5 times, which by the way, 3 to 5 times a day is actually pretty often if you think about it. I mean, during a work day, that's once every couple of hours, basically, not even every 2 hours, right? That's pretty frequent. That's pretty often to be checking your messages. But the fact that we don't even consider that frequent in our society is a little scary.
Right. I mean, think about it, but that checking also doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaging for a long time. They could just be picking it up and opening it up to see
Yeah.
if there's a message and then putting it down. And I'm sure you've seen it being out with a group of people at dinner and just in the middle of the conversation, people will constantly be doing this to check it. So, I mean, it is where we're at right now, and part of that is going to be self-discipline. I know Apple introduced modes in their operating system for the iPhone called I think it was Focus or something like that, where you can actually set times where you can't access certain apps, so that you can do what you're saying, like where you can focus on what you're doing. And then people can use things, productivity types of techniques like the Pomodoro technique, where you shut off everything and you focus on what you're doing in 25-minute increments at a time, and don't look at phones, don't look at email, don't, whatever your task is, you do that, and you do that in cycles until you take breaks, which actually increases your productivity. So it's going to come down to people using more self-control and things like that, because app makers are going to keep trying to keep you on the phone as long as possible.
Right, right. And I also put on there something that might have sounded a little funny. I said that the kind of work that I do doesn't really require immediate attention, meaning
Mm,
from a client, right? It requires my immediate attention, quite
right.
possibly, but I don't need, if so, it's not like I don't do criminal law, so no one's calling me up saying I got to bail them out or something, something where I got to
Right,
drop
right,
everything and run to the courthouse or something like that. That's not what it is. It basically goes month to month, right? You go in for a court date, and then your next court date is probably going to be a month from now, and then what needs to be done from now until then. And so there's never really a situation where a client needs to call me where I need to just drop everything or it's going to affect what I'm working on. I mean, whatever I'm doing can wait at least that hour or two, you know.
right, right.
And
So
I think most jobs are probably like that, right? Even outside of lawyers, I don't think most people need to be on their phones as much.
it depends on what, yeah, it depends on what your job. Like you said, most
Yeah.
jobs. Like if you're doing something in media or communications, um, social media, digital marketing or marketing, then I can see more of a case for that. But in other jobs where that's not, if you're a content creator, yeah, you probably need to be on social media or on your phone. But other than that, we could definitely scale back
Even
our usage.
even a content creator, though, I mean, you still have to create the content, right? Doesn't that take time and focus? And so the thing
Sure.
is with the phone gives you a lot of distractions, and so it takes you out of what you're trying to achieve, and it just sets you on a whole different path, right? Like if you allow yourself to be distracted by that phone call or that text or that email or that
Right.
social media ping, right? Whatever it is, the comment, then you are now taking your day in a different direction. And so if you were trying to do some content creation, well, you're no longer doing the content creation. Now you're
Right.
going down the detour, right? That your phone took you on.
Well, I was thinking more in line if you're using your phone to do the
Yeah, yeah,
content
yeah.
creation. Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing too. Some people actually just work on their phones. That's what I was saying earlier. It's
Right.
basically just a computer, right? They're just using it as we would
Yeah. Oh yeah, a lot of people.
tablet or anything. So that's
Yeah.
part of it as well, right? But I
Yeah.
do think because we are aware we're having these conversations. People, I think, and we're not the only ones. People are starting to talk about this, the effect it takes on on our mental health, and
Absolutely.
you talk about cyberbullying and suicide rates, all these different things, right? As a result of social media, and so I think that we are starting to move away towards the over reliance or I think we're at least starting to realize that there is an addictive quality to it, and we should be trying to
Right.
mitigate that. Whereas when it was all very novel, I don't think anyone really cared. We just kind of threw ourselves into it, you know,
Right.
because it was this great new technology that everyone's just embracing without even being mindful of the negative consequences.
Right. Yeah. So found it pretty interesting.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And I would love to, I've said this before, I would love to have a day where people didn't get on their smartphones at all or even take them. But the problem is you can't announce that because that just puts in people's heads that no one has their phones, and people can take advantage of that.
well, there are. I mean, there are.
There
People
are,
have done these types of things. There's like unplug days, the
yeah, but think
National
about
Day
it.
of Unplugging. Yeah.
If we were to tell people that though, if we were to tell people no one take your phone today, that could be a dangerous situation, right? People could get mugged, or people would think, oh, they can't even call the cops on me now, but they can't take the camera out. You know what I mean? And to stop me. I feel like I don't know if it would be safe to have an entire neighborhood of people when everyone, no one has their phone on a given day.
You mean going back to
Go,
life before
going
the
back
year
to her life.
2000?
Right, right. There's a different world. But that's
Yeah.
also an interesting point. And I thought of that myself. And people are all freaking out. Even when I put up a post saying I don't check my phone that many times, they're saying, well, how can you survive like that? And I just think,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't that long ago when we didn't even have this kind of technology.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this current revolution of addiction started with the iPhone, and that was probably somewhere around 2006, 7, 8, or sometime, I think.
Yeah. Well, they did the BlackBerry, right?
Yeah, but yeah, the two-way.
Sidekick.
Yeah, but I think this
Oh,
big thing that we're looking at now, where we're at now, was when the iPhone released, and that was 2007, because
okay.
that's when the apps popped up in the App Store, and then
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know all of that stuff. So
All right. Well,
crazy stuff. Let's get
yeah.
into it.
And speaking of new technologies, we had a poll last week that was centered around AI, right?
We did. So the poll last week um, was asking if should political campaigns be required to label multimedia content generated by AI as such, because we know that there's definitely a danger in using AI to be able to misinform or mislead people. At the same time, it's very powerful and can be an asset
Mhm.
in campaigns or any sort of work. And so we asked if people should, if these things should be labeled or not, especially in something sensitive like political campaigns and voting and such.
Right.
Now, for some reason, the poll app again messed up and wouldn't
Okay.
didn't show the actual poll, but we did get comments.
Now, that's been a couple of weeks running, right? We got to figure out why that's not working.
It did that two times, and then I sent a message to their help desk, and then the next week or two it worked, and then I posted this again, and this time it didn't work again. So I don't know what's going on. It's
Oh,
something on their site apparently. But the comments, we got a number of comments here. Um, and someone was very emphatic, all caps, in bold and underlined with exclamation marks. Yes, without a doubt, the potential for abuse in elections is huge.
right.
Um, Someone else said watermark all of it. Um, Someone else said if it were up to me, the use of AI in deceptive campaign ads would be disqualifying. Now that's an interesting point.
We actually touched upon that last week, and I think we struggled with this idea of okay, so if it's deceptive, who determines and
Right,
where is it determined whether
right.
it's deceptive? Is
What's the
that done
line?
by, yeah, does that have to go to court? Does it have to be a lawsuit? Is there a board that's put together for that purpose?
Right,
You know,
right,
and that word deceptive gets tricky, right? Because it's a loaded word and people have
right,
different interpretations of it.
right,
And then there's also constitutional issues when it comes to, unfortunately, lying, right? Lying is protected by the First Amendment. And so
right,
it doesn't mean that it's, always, let's just be clear, right? There are times when it's not. So it's not per se protected, but to have a blanket rule that you could never be deceptive would not be constitutional. So you'd have to fit it within the proper parameters, right? Like we talked about, fraud is a type of deception that's not protected, that's not lawful. But
right,
simply lying about someone, there's no law.
right,
There's no, unfortunately, you can do that unless it crosses the line into defamation, which this, may often do. But that would
right,
need to be a legal determination again, right? You would need lawyers looking at that and arguing it, right? Now you're talking essentially a lawsuit, legal case here. Um,
right.
did it meet the
And they brought
elements
up
of defamation?
the at the very least, if it's not disqualifying, there should be heavily fined for misinformation or for defamation of for each they this person was a little strict. They said it should be $1 million for each defamation image of the opponent.
For each defamation image.
For
Yeah.
each
And
defamation,
so
and then
then,
$100,000 per flattering misinformation.
okay.
So they were very strict with it. So, but the majority of the comments here were all in agreement that it should be labeled. There was one comment that took an opposite approach,
Mhm.
and they said, why not label all art? Because anything a person can create can be used for misinformation. And they posted several images in as examples. And so for one of they used a picture, I think it was a picture of Stalin, and there was someone standing next to them. And I guess it was photoshopped in the person that was standing there, and they weren't originally in the original picture, or taken out or something like that. And so like, why not force label something like this? Because people can do manipulation even without AI. They can do it with Photoshop. They could
Right.
do it with airbrushing. Why not make all art, everything, anything that you use be labeled?
But labeled how? Because it's
Well, I guess
art.
that's
I mean, if it's art, it's obviously art. If it's an image, it's an image. So are they saying label the source of every image, or just label it as what? Use the put the programs that you use to create the image. I mean, what is their proposal?
label that it's been manipulated.
But it's been manipulated.
I would
Okay.
assume that everything, if it's been manipulated, that should be labeled as such. And we're talking in political advertising, but
Yeah. But then also the question is how manipulated. I mean, are you talking about shading,
right,
touching something up, or are you talking about just creating something that wasn't even there in the first place?
right. And then again, I mean, it's not
Changing the
all images.
background, that's done all the time, right? You have a photo of someone, you put them on a different background, that's manipulating the image. But
Right,
that's done routinely, right? Does that need to be labeled?
right. And it's not all images. As we pointed
Yeah.
out last time, it could be text copy that the AI helped you write, like um what's it, the city councilwoman elect yeah, out of I believe she's out of Brooklyn, used. It just came out, I guess, yesterday.
Yeah.
Susan, don't know how to pronounce her last name. Zhuang. She's out of Brooklyn, and she was using AI to respond to questions on questionnaires, to fill out a questionnaire about her personal interests and policies.
Right.
And the question that she used, well, she used AI to fill it out, but it became suspicious because of one of the answers. And the question was, what makes someone a New Yorker?
Mm.
And the answer was New York City, the concrete jungle where dreams come true.
Get out of
It's
here.
not just a place, it's a state of mind. Being a New Yorker means having an unstoppable hustle, unbreakable resilience, and unrivaled independence. It's about navigating the fast paced streets with confidence and embracing the vibrant diversity that makes this city so special. Join a community of like minded individuals who are proud to call themselves New Yorkers. Connect with people from all walks of life, sharing diverse cultures and backgrounds. Contribute to the city's dynamic tapestry and experience the energy and excitement as you become part of something bigger than yourself.
Okay.
And so that flagged
It kind
people
of had
like,
me
wait a
going
minute.
for a second, but the way it ended, it does seem kind of incongruent with the question.
It was, but even the way it was answered, it
Yeah.
people looked at it like, wait a minute, this sounds kind of funny. And so
Yeah.
they reached out, and she did admit that she used AI to it. And she was saying that it was helpful because English is not her first language.
Mhm.
And so there is a use case, but you know, should it have been labeled or at least checked or something like that?
Right. I want to shout out everyone who's joining us in the chat. I see James left a comment on the Chick-fil-A, which we will get to in a few minutes here. Jeremy,
Okay.
Paul, Deborah, Richie, everyone else. Thank you guys.
What's up?
So, yeah, so it seems like most people then, according to the poll, are saying that it should be labeled, some even going further and saying that all deceptive practices should be banned. And then I
Right,
agree, we should do all we can to mitigate or potentially eliminate, well, even though it's going to be impossible to truly eliminate it, but move
right,
towards eliminating all deceptive practices in politics. But it's unfortunately it's going to be very, very difficult to even make steps, I think, in that direction. I guess labeling AI
right,
generated content could be a good step, but you still have to be careful with how that's implemented, right? What are the
right.
parameters of that? And why are we making that distinction of AI as opposed to, as we mentioned, Photoshop or any other tool that's out there.
Right. I think because of how easily it could be done. With Photoshop, there is a little bit of a barrier because you have to be able to manipulate it and do well with Photoshop. With AI,
Make it look
you can
realistic.
just type in a quick description and it's more accessible. So it's
But should we be stopping at AI though?
it's a good question. I don't think they should be using deceptive practices in political campaigns or
Right.
marketing, period.
Right.
I mean, in marketing there is
Advertising.
right. So there's things in place to say that you can't, and then people can be held accountable for misleading or false advertising. So shouldn't that be the same in political campaigns as well? But then
Yeah.
again, it comes to who judges. If
Right.
the
Right.
campaign,
Who judges? And the thing is this: when you have a partisan election, right? The very nature of politics is you're pitting people with diametrically opposed, often, views
right,
against each other. And so what's true to one person is going to be deceptive to the other person and vice versa. Right. So it
right,
really depends on who's looking at it. It's hard to get an objective sense, unless you really clearly define the parameters of what's allowed and what's not. To just use a word like deceptive. I mean, I can say
right,
I've got a tax plan that's going to save people this amount of money. And then the other person said, that's deceptive as hell. You know what I mean? Like that's just how people
right.
approach these things.
Yeah, he said it was gonna save me $1,000. It only saved me 400. He lied. It's deceptive. Like it's
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Some
you can point, you can nitpick anything, also, right? I mean,
right,
even if it's mostly true, and from your perspective, it is all true. They might, like you said, maybe the growth isn't as fast as they thought it should be, and they thought what you said somehow misrepresented how fast the recovery was going to be, or whatever. It seems like because it's that adversarial environment featuring pitting people against each other who disagree on fundamentally everything, it's going to be hard to find any kind of consensus about what's deceptive and what's not, right? It's like we
right.
don't deal with the same set of facts anymore.
Yeah. So interesting poll, interesting responses. Again, most people seem to agree that it should. So maybe it's something that should be looked into more. And it seems many people agree, not just the people on the site, but governments as well, because states have moved to, so at least 5 states have already moved to make these things required, like labeling it to be required. And then, of course, what was it recently, within the last day or two, Meta and Google also put a requirement in that AI content and political ads that they run have to be labeled as such, if I'm not mistaken. So people are already moving in that direction to add that layer
Yeah,
of
we've seen
transparency.
efforts across the board to try to get ahead of the AI issue, right?
Yeah,
Regulate the technology in some fashion before it gets out of
right,
hand. And so I
right,
think that's commendable. But like with everything, we just have to be careful with how we do it.
right. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
all right. Well, speaking of polls, because there's already comment, at least one that I saw in the chat about this. What's up,
Right.
Jactus, Danny, for joining us. Chick-fil-A, right? James in the chat, let's get his comment out there. He says, I'm all for banning Chick-fil-A. KFC and Popeyes are way better, and they're not homophobic to my knowledge. Bring back Roy Rogers, too. Bring back Roy Rogers. All right. So, for those who don't know, there is a bill that was recently introduced in the New York legislature, and it doesn't mention Chick-fil-A by name, although it's pretty transparent what is going on here. They are trying to require establishments that are operating rest stops on the New York State Thruway to be open 7 days a week. Now, Chick-fil-A, as many know, is always closed on Sunday. I think even Kanye had a song called "Closed on Sunday." I forget, but he had a song and a hook referencing that fact, right? That Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday. And
Okay.
no, you don't know that song? You should go look it
I
up.
haven't listened
It's
to I
not,
haven't
it's
listened
not a
to a
very good song.
comment.
It's interesting for this discussion. But And in fact, the only reason why I really know about that is because I know that was one of the songs he recorded on his phone, which I thought was ridiculous. He went from having such great quality to recording on his phone. But so Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday because of religious observances, right? They're a very Christian organization. And of course, they franchise, right? So each one is
Right.
individually owned, but from all accounts, they do a lot of vetting before someone can open up their own Chick-fil-A. And
Mm,
they say things that sound, quite frankly, suspicious, right? They say, well, before we allow you to open up your own franchise, we want to put you through a very vigorous interview process to make sure that your values match ours, right? And
right.
given Chick-fil-A's history of being anti-LGBTQ, that obviously raises red flags. It seems like they want people who share those positions. And
Mm,
New York has taken efforts to keep Chick-fil-A out. Obviously, it's a business. There are Chick-fil-A locations throughout New York, but I know when they were trying to open up by NYU, there was a big pushback, and I think those efforts were successful, if I'm not mistaken. And so now we've got this effort to get them out of the rest stops along the Thruway in New York.
mm,
To be fair, part of the rationale extends beyond Chick-fil-A's stances, right? Part of it is that they're saying that Sunday is the busiest travel day, and it doesn't make sense to have restaurants operating at rest stops, which are going to be closed on the busiest travel day.
I agree with that. I mean, if I'm traveling and I'm on the road and I go to a rest stop, you go there expecting to get food, to get, bathroom, food, to rest, to refuel, that type of thing. And if you get in there and the places are closed, it's like, why are you even here? What's your point? So I get that part. I definitely get that part.
Okay, well, what about the other part that their values don't align with the state of New York's values?
I don't know. I don't know how to comment on that really. Um, because I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with Chick-fil-A and their stance.
Yeah,
So yeah, I don't really know how to comment on that.
part of it, from what I understand, is that they have a history of not just vocally opposing issues like gay marriage and things like that, but also giving money to some of these anti-gay groups. That's why I
Mm,
know a lot of people boycott the establishment because they don't want their money going towards those groups.
mm. Well, are those the rest stops are run by the state, right?
Well, there's a contract.
With the state.
The state,
Right. So I mean, in that sense, it's something that's supposed to be available for all. So I don't think we should have it probably wouldn't be a good idea to have these places in there that are going to be in these opposition stances like Chick-fil-A, perhaps. Again, I don't know that much about their stance and what they've done. What kind of choices the
see,
people would have.
I just want to mention something, and this relates just to the previous discussion, right? About you said that they should be available to all, right?
Right.
Now, from your perspective, I honestly, when you said that, I didn't know which direction you were going when you said available to all, because some people might think that all includes Chick-fil-A and people who have those same values, right? Because now, if you're keeping them out, there are some people who can say, well, what about us, hardcore Christians or however they describe themselves? They're going to claim that they're being discriminated against somehow.
Right. I was mentioning customers
Yeah,
being
yeah, I get
available,
you.
but
But I'm
you
just
that
saying,
also
I
makes
guess
a
as an
point.
example as how we can look at the same thing and it can be interpreted in two
Yeah.
different ways, right? And that's why it's hard to put a ban on something that you would call deceptive, for example, right? Because
Right.
it's going
Right.
to have their own interpretation to this. So
Right.
yeah, okay, so I see where you're going. So the customers, but the question is, to play devil's advocate, would there be, I don't know, Christian customers who would think that they're being discriminated against by not having the option of having an establishment that they think is consistent with their values?
I think that's a stretch, because if those values are exclusive types of values,
But
I
they don't
think
look at it
that
that way, though. And so
they
we,
don't. But in practice,
yeah,
And to be, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Chick-fil-A, I mean, has a sign that says, yeah, if you're LGBTQ, you can't order here. I don't know if they
No,
have that, but
take anyone's money, I'm sure.
yeah, sure. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know how far they go and what their stance is to be able to effectively answer that. But I do agree that one, places should be open 7 days a week because that's what the rest stops are there for. Two, if they are involved in some of these discriminatory, pushing some of these discriminatory agendas, then people shouldn't eat there. They should, if that's not what they're in line with, they should avoid those places. The state probably shouldn't be eager to get into bed with them as well, because it can uh, put off other people, some of the rest of the citizens and residents. Um, it doesn't sound like it should be a good place for them to be.
Right. So we were going to make that our poll question for the week. For the record, I never even had Chick-fil-A. Some people say their sandwiches are great. I don't even know what it tastes like. I've had Popeye's chicken sandwich, which I thought was okay.
Yeah, I haven't had any of them. So I think the only thing I've had from Chick-fil-A was years ago, and it was the waffle fries. Because people said their waffle fries are great, and I thought they were all right. Yeah.
Comment here in the chat. They can go to Popeyes or KFC. So Popeyes and KFC, I guess, is pretty popular. Uh,
Right, right.
Shout out to I see Jeremy in the chat room, John Dibbs. Some more guys logging in, Steven, JC.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's put up the poll question. Hopefully, the website will work this time where we can get a numerical result. So, the
Right.
question of the week is: do you agree with efforts in the New York State legislature to push Chick-fil-A out of the state's rest stops due to their anti-LGBT stances?
A good question. A good question.
All right.
Yeah.
See how the people respond to that. Speaking of good questions, I suppose we have breaking news
Uh-oh.
of today, not long ago today. The Colorado Supreme Court has ruled, let's pull up this article here. They've ruled that Donald Trump cannot appear on the state's ballot in the presidential race in 2024, finding that he is an insurrectionist. Of course, the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution bans insurrectionists from holding public office. There was that weird decision that we had discussed a couple of weeks ago about how
Right.
the court had found him to be an insurrectionist, but not an officer of the US, where I guess
Right.
president wasn't considered an officer of the US. And so he would be banned from other offices, but not for president. It seemed kind of like a cop out or a weird conclusion. But the Colorado Supreme Court has just in a 4-3 opinion said that he is an insurrectionist, and I suppose consistent with this result, they're saying that the office of the presidency is an office of the U.S., and so they're saying that that bars him from appearing on the ballot. Now, of course, we can expect his team to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the result may be different.
Listen, I agree with the Colorado result. He shouldn't be on the ballot. He is an insurrectionist. He was acting as head of state at the time. Even if he wasn't, I mean, he's clearly trying to upend our government and our democracy. He keeps saying over and over again that when he gets in, he's going to act like a dictator for a while. So, I mean, he's being very clear about his insurrectionist stance. So I agree with Colorado. I think more states should do it, but also, the Supreme Court has got the conservative bias, and a lot of people, several that he put in. So
Right, I
I
was going to
think
say that's something you also have to keep in mind, right? That he appointed some.
right, right, and I think he did. Listen, it was a long-term play. Right, the GOP and Trump, they were playing long-term with installing all the different judges in different places and this and that to deal with any types of issues. To perpetuate the conservative mindset and the way that they think about things, but also for situations like this to where they can get things overturned when they want it. So yeah, I don't think he'll be held I think he'll be allowed to get on the ballot if it gets to the Supreme Court, and they'll overrule that.
Yeah, I think that would be the smart bet. Although it is interesting that in some cases, even the justices that he appointed went against his interest, right? And surprised people. I think it might have been on student loans and a few other things. They went against him. But on this one, I have a hard time seeing it. And unfortunately, that is cynicism, right? I'm coming to that conclusion strictly based on the politics of the situation. It's not
Yeah.
about the constitutional analysis, which it should be, right? You should expect the Supreme Court to rule strictly on the Constitution and the law. But
Right.
this is so political. You almost wonder if it's a political question to the extent that the Supreme Court should not rule on it at all. I mean, imagine that. Imagine they just defer to the individual states. That would be something. But like I said, I think the smart money is on them saying that he can run. And then I guess the question is, what decision would they use? Would they say he's not an insurrectionist at all? Or will they punt like the other court did and say, well, maybe he is an insurrectionist, but we don't consider the office of the presidency to be an officer of the US. And so it doesn't even matter, right? They could do that
Right.
too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a case where it gets to the Supreme Court. It's going to be split
Yeah,
along liberal conservative lines,
right.
and he's going to win. Then he's going to go on TV and talk about, how, how amazing he is and how he can't be held down and how they tried to stop me. And yeah.
Do you think, though, this has any effect at all on the campaign?
On his campaign?
Well, let's assume that what you said actually happens, right?
Yeah.
It all happens, so he gets back on the ballot. But will it move the voters in any way?
Um, it would keep his voters in line. I mean, it
That's a
feeds
given.
into it feeds into the narrative that, that he is that guy, right? That nothing can
Yeah,
stop him.
but
He's
that's
the
it. But
right
that's
choice.
his voters aren't going to move regardless. I'm talking about
Right.
the state of the race, which is really decided more by the swing voters who can go either way.
I
Their minds can
don't
be made up or affected at all by that.
I don't think that'll change, but some people who are on the fence and don't hold like a negative opinion of Trump, uh,
Well, I think most
the
people on
more
the
things that the more things that are stacked against him that he overcomes, it could sway a few people to be like, yeah, they keep trying to stop this guy. Why? And it might trigger
yeah,
some conspiracy stuff to themselves or
right.
whatever it is. And
It's
they might,
interesting just trying to parse the data that's out there now about all of the legal trouble, right? All these law cases.
right. I
Because
think 90 some charges against him right now.
yeah, it seems like most voters are not really paying attention to that yet. Now, we talked about maybe once March comes and the criminal trial is on TV every day, maybe people will start looking at it more. But as of now, it seems like the legal issues, the indictments and everything else, even the civil suits and possibly this, it's not really on people's radars one way or the other. What's interesting though, as well, is that the data does show that, at least as of now, if he were to be convicted on any of the charges, he would lose in a landslide. So it seems like people are almost holding out to see if these charges stick.
I mean, just the fact that people are waiting for that shows that things are kind of screwed up. Like, dude, he's already got 98, or I think it's 90 some charges that against him. You know, what was it we talked about a few weeks ago where Adams had the FBI or CIA investigating potential collusion in one or two counts, and they're like he should step down. Like, Trump's got like 90
Right.
counts, and he's going for the president of the United States, and people are like, "Yeah, well, we'll see what happens." Like, it just shows that things are kind of nothing. Things are messed up. People's priorities
Yeah.
aren't in the right place. People are thinking too much in their group think on their side, and they're not really looking at a bigger picture. They're not looking at the implications, like the fact that we've got someone running in the first place for that party for president, and people even thinking like, oh yeah, it's okay if he gets convicted and wins. Like, just the thought behind that is just ridiculous.
Yeah. And also the idea that, like you mentioned, so if the mayor, not even indicted, right? But that, what was it? They see the FBI sees his phone, right? People said that was
Right.
enough for him to step
Yep.
down. But why is that? How come people say that about him, but not
Right.
the president?
And it's not just Adams. I mean, that would
Yeah,
happen
yeah.
a lot
No, but
for
you're right
any
though. If any investigation,
politician.
yeah, yeah, it doesn't even have to be an indictment, right? If you hear that an elected official is under investigation, there are so many calls for him to step down immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah,
And then, but here it's, I mean, of course, there are definitely people calling for Trump to come out of the race, but, you know, it should be, he should be barred from the race or some kind of measure. But his supporters are just like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, he could be a felon. He could be a president from prison. It doesn't matter. Like, are you listening to yourself?
right, right.
So,
And yeah, that's also just, I think, a testament to how cynical people have become. You know, they have no
eh,
faith in any of our institutions.
right. And listen, to be fair, there's not a lot of examples that should give them that faith. I mean, we have politicians, some that are doing good jobs, and you know, Biden's got a lot of good accomplishments, but the fact that our discourse in the political sphere is this crazy, it doesn't help to give people you know, a positive outlook on the whole environment. So, you know, it's easy to see how people can be disillusioned regardless of what's happening.
Right. But it still seems selective, right? I mean, maybe people are
Yeah.
just going their own agenda and trying to contort what's happening to serve their narrative.
Right.
But why do we have faith in institutions again when there's an investigation into the mayor? Why isn't everyone saying, well,
Right.
it's all political, like, you know, it's a witch hunt or whatever? Why is it that sometimes we take it seriously and sometimes we don't? But it
Right.
just depends on where you stood in the first place, right? And that's
Yeah.
also a sad state of affairs, that people don't even really pay attention to what's happening, you know, or at least it doesn't allow, you know, it doesn't inform their opinions, right? They start off with the conclusion that they want to reach, and then they'll just
Right.
use whatever is out there to try to bolster the opinion that they already had, you know?
Right. And that's one of the biggest issues in all of this discourse, is that people are just looking to prove their stance already. And so if you're looking for, if you have a stance, chances are there's going to be some information out there somewhere you could find that's going to support the stance you have, no matter how incorrect it is. But then you're able to find that information and you stack that information on top of each other. Now you've got a wealth of information. So you feel even more in the right because, look, I've got all this data. And so this is issues that we're having.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, why it would be nice to be able to curb deceptive information, but one man's truth is the next man's lie. So
And that's what, you know, we saw efforts to do that after Trump's first election, when the places like Facebook and Instagram and these different social media platforms, Twitter, took steps to do fact checking on posts that went through, because there was so much misinformation that went out. And even that was fought against, right? A lot of conservatives were like, "Oh, well, these fact checks are not true." Like, no, they're fact checks. That's what the term is. No, I don't agree with it. Doesn't matter if you agree; it's a fact. It's not opinion. There's difference here. And so then you had, that's where places like Parler and I don't know, the other conservative Twitter clone that popped up that's failing.
or something.
True Social, a lot of these places started popping up because they're like, oh, we need a space for our truth. No, you need a space for your propaganda because you can't handle that you're lying and people are calling you out. But you know, it's
Yeah.
that type of situation where we're in right now.
All right. Well, with the few minutes we have left, I wanted to turn back to New York and look at this bill that was actually signed by the governor, because the governor only has a few more days left in the year to sign certain bills, right, that were passed this year. And I
Right.
don't get too into the weeds on the pocket veto process, right? Because normally if the governor doesn't sign or veto a bill, it becomes law automatically. But there's an exception for bills that were not sent to the governor's desk while the legislature was in session. Those
Hmm.
bills, if the governor doesn't act on them, do not become law. They call that a pocket veto because the governor is not actually vetoing the bill, right? She's just letting them die, basically, by not signing them. But
Uh-huh.
we've got a list of bills sitting on the governor's desk. I don't know if we're going to get a chance to go over them, but one of the bills that I wanted to mention, which was signed by the governor, is this Reparations Commission, and it was actually sponsored by Senator Sanders and Assemblywoman Szilagyi in the Assembly.
Hmm.
It's law now, so the governor signed it. It establishes a commission and actually makes an appropriation of $250,000 to get this commission going, to see
Hmm.
how reparations might look in the state of New York. So I pulled up the text of the bill. I don't know if you have it there.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here.
Looking at the text. So they've got paragraphs, looks like at least three. Let's see.
Yeah, this is Senate Bill S1163A.
Yeah. Okay. So here you go. Looks like at least, okay, 3 pages just of the history of slavery. And they talk about how slavery was not just a Southern institution. It actually,
Right.
according to this, flourished in New York State. Um,
Yeah.
if you scroll down to section 3, it starts talking about what this commission exactly is enlisted to do. The duties of the commission: examine the institution of slavery, which existed in the state of New York and in the city of New York.
Mm.
And it talks about, of course, what that all entailed. Then it goes down to number 2: examine the extent to which the federal and state governments of the U.S. supported the institution of slavery, including the extent to which such governments prevented, opposed, or restricted efforts of freed enslaved Africans to repatriate to their homeland.
Mm.
Examine federal and state laws that discriminated against freed African slaves. Okay, so there's a lot of, I'm just scrolling through this here, a lot of examining the history, which is good. I want to see what their recommendations for the future are going to be. Okay, examine other forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors. Examine the lingering negative effects of slavery. Okay, here we go. Now towards the future. Section 6, recommend appropriate ways to educate the American public of the commission's findings. Recommend appropriate remedies in consideration of the commission's findings of the matters above. The commission shall determine the form of compensation, the amount of compensation, and who should be eligible for compensation. Report to the legislature. The
Hmm.
commission shall submit a written report of its findings and recommendations. Does it say when? Oh, no later than the date, which is 1 year after the date of the first meeting of the commission. Okay. Now we can get into membership. So just to see who's on this commission, how is this commission made up, right? We've got 15 members here appointed within 90 days of the effective date of this act. So soon, 3 members appointed by the governor, 3 members appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly, 3 members appointed by the temporary president of the Senate, 6 members selected from the major civil society and reparations organizations that have historically championed the cause of reparatory justice. So there you go. You're going to have this commission formed by these people. They're going to have their first meeting within 120 days of the effective act. And within a year
Right.
of their first meeting, they're supposed to report back with their findings and recommendations. I think the important part of that is part of their findings are supposed to be who is eligible for compensation and how much.
That's gonna be that's the difficult one of the difficult parts in any of these in any plan or idea of how to dole out reparations payments, because there's just simply so many people. And I know some people are going to say, well, it's also because it's so far away, but it's really not. We're still, and I've told this, I don't know if I mentioned it on here before. We think about road, not geez, who are we talking about? The Underground Railroad,
Yeah.
right?
Harry
And
Tubman.
yeah, we talk about the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman, and it just seems so long ago, right? I knew my great grandmother, probably up until high school. My great grandmother was born in 1903.
Mm,
Harriet Tubman died in 1913.
right.
So
So she was
that's
still alive.
literally someone I knew was alive when Harriet Tubman was
Yeah.
alive,
Right.
right? It's not that long ago.
Right. And also, I think that's why it's important that this law now doesn't want the commission only to study the effects of slavery, but basically the after effects of it that persisted for generations
Right,
and in some ways still persist, right? They're talking
right,
about not just slavery, but discrimination, and
right,
institutional discrimination, right? How was that
right,
even codified in our laws in our society? And I think that's important for providing the proper context to this discussion because, like you said, people will think that was so long ago, that was the 1800s, but what did it create, right? What are the after
right,
effects of that, and how are we still trying to recover from that today?
right. Absolutely. So it's definitely a challenge. I think it's one that should be taken up. Um, but it's definitely a challenge and how it's going to be rectified and how, like I said, how who gets it, what's a payment, what's allowed under it, you know. So
Right, and
good
because
luck
it's
to them.
controversial, because California, I think, took this on as a study as
Right,
well, and we see movements throughout the country on this, and there's a large discussion about okay, how would it
sure.
look and who would qualify, right? Would it only be the direct descendants of African slaves? Would you have to prove that? Would that require some kind of
Right,
DNA test or family tree? How would you exactly prove that?
right,
A recent immigrant to the country, would you not qualify? Should you still qualify, right? I mean, that discrimination might not have applied directly, or at least slavery might not have applied directly to your descendants, but you're still in that system and you still bear the brunt of that institutional discrimination. So
right,
these are complicated questions, right? Some
right.
people, like you said, they think it's too long ago and they don't think it's fair to give out cash payments. Someone even said to me once, that's going to discourage people from working. I said, well, okay, but what about helping someone start a business? That's doing the opposite of that. That's giving them access to a part of the economy that maybe they were shut out from historically. So,
I always say that gonna discourage people from working. Well, what are they paying back for? For free labor from people
working,
who
right,
didn't
working
work.
without having been paid for it.
Right. And for people who didn't work that made the bulk of their wealth, who
Yeah,
have companies that still persist to this day. Like, what are you talking about?
right. Not to mention that that was a promise that was not fulfilled,
Right.
right?
So,
40 acres and a mule.
right. That was one of the proposals. I think it was a field general. But yeah, I mean, it just listen, there are some wrongs that need to be righted that the country is responsible for. And in a lot of cases, they have made efforts to right them in other cases, like um, what happened with the Japanese internment when they made attempts to make right those things. Even with Native Americans, even though things aren't the best situation for them, they have made concessions for some of the things that they've done to them. Listen, the country owes a debt to a lot of people, and and should and should seriously uptake making those right. And not just the payment. It has to be fundamental change so
Yeah.
that it doesn't just keep repeating.
Jeremy in the chat says effects of Jim Crow laws. Yeah, that's
Effects of Jim
a part
Crow
of it.
laws, and they're coming back. We're seeing them come back,
Right.
basically.
And that's hopefully the commission gets to study that as well, right? Not just what happened in the past, what's still happening. And not just the
Right.
facts of what happened in the past that are still happening, but what actual efforts and laws even around the country and anywhere that really still perpetrate this.
Right. I mean, we've seen a lot change. I mean, what the rollbacks of affirmative
Yeah.
action, the
Voting
Voting
Rights
Rights
Act.
Act
Yeah.
repeals, these types of things that are actually situations and standards that were around during Jim Crow laws that allowed them to act a certain way that is now allowable again. So, yeah, all of that should be taken into consideration.
James in the chat. All right, so he has a comment here like, about Chick-fil-A again. He said, my grandma went to Chick-fil-A in New Jersey and she said it was expensive, dry, and gross. This was before we found out they were homophobic. All right.
Yeah. I don't think grandma's gonna be visiting Chick-fil-A at a rest stop.
Hey, you never know. Long
Yeah.
trip, the family. So, all right. Well, as always, we have had an interesting discussion, and we will see what the people have to say, in particular with respect to the poll question that we're putting out. But anything else we discussed, we're certainly hoping to hear people's thoughts and opinions. So why don't we shoot the bottom line over to you this week, Jay?
The bottom line, uh, I think I'll go off the last point here. The bottom line is that we should definitely look at the past to inform the future. And we say this a lot, that we learn history so that we don't repeat it. But we're not exactly following that. We're not living up to that. We're not benefiting from that because we do study history, but people are looking at history sometimes with a selfish sort of lens or a self-focused lens that's going to distort the message that we get from history. And we have to look at history as it has happened and take the lessons from it that it's giving us, not our judgment on that, so that we can move towards the future. And we've said it here a number of times, just like, our sacred documents working towards a more perfect union. And we want to take those lessons to be able to do that and move forward and have a better future that's something that's equitable for all citizens of the United States.
All right. Well said. That is the bottom line. As always, you can find us pretty much anywhere, right? YouTube at Nuance Show. We're on Instagram, so you can get in on the discussions there. Of course, podcasts, wherever podcasts are available, subscribe and get the shows in audio form pushed directly to your devices when they come out. And of course, live on Facebook every Tuesday. We've been doing that for a while, so thank you all for joining us in the chat every week and wherever you are finding us. We are close to, have we hit 100,000 yet? I think we're close to 100,000 on YouTube.
100,000 views, yeah, close to.
Okay. So we will let everyone know once we reach that milestone. I do want to do something in honor of the people who have been joining us this whole time. So we'll talk about that. As always, we've got work to do, and we'll catch you next week. Have a good night, everyone.